What if the most explosive secret in modern royal history wasn't hidden in a vault, but slipped out on live television, not whispered behind palace walls, not buried in a sealed archive, but spoken just loudly enough for the right people to hear? Because that's what makes this moment different. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For years, rumors about Prince Harry have floated through tabloids, documentaries, and dinner party conversations. He's been criticized, mocked, defended, and dissected more than almost any royal in history. And yet, through all of it, one thing stood out. He almost never threatened to sue, until now. And suddenly, the names Lady C and Tom Bower were on the receiving end of something far more serious than criticism. Legal threats, warnings, lines being drawn. So here's the question no one can ignore. Why this story? Why now? And why does a single claim about a DNA test seem to have struck a nerve so deep that lawyers were allegedly brought into the conversation almost immediately? This isn't about gossip. This is about reaction. Think about it. Prince Harry has endured brutal headlines, accusations, leaks, even deeply personal attacks on his marriage, his parenting, and his mental health. Most of the time, he responded with silence, or interviews, or carefully chosen words. But this time the response wasn't a rebuttal. It wasn't a denial. It was a threat. And that alone changes everything. Because when someone who has spent years telling the world his truth suddenly tries to shut down a conversation entirely, it forces one uncomfortable question into the spotlight. What truth is off limits? According to Lady C and Tom Bower, the issue wasn't just speculation. It wasn't framed as a wild theory. It was discussed as something that had already happened. A private DNA test, quietly conducted, and most importantly, never publicly resolved. No document released, no statement clarifying, no clear yes or no, just silence. And in royal history, silence is never accidental. The palace has denied false stories in the past with lightning speed. One briefing, one source, one carefully worded line, and a rumor disappears. But when the truth is complicated, when it risks destabilizing something bigger, that's when things go quiet, which makes the timing of this alleged legal threat impossible to ignore. Ask yourself this: if the DNA claim were completely fabricated, why not shut it down immediately with a single sentence? Why not say, plainly, this never happened? Why escalate instead? And why do it after a live TV moment, when the comment had already been heard, recorded, and replayed? That's the contradiction at the heart of this story. Prince Harry has built a global brand on transparency, on speaking openly about trauma, identity, and pain. He has accused the royal family of hiding the truth, of burying uncomfortable facts, of choosing image over honesty. And yet, according to these claims, there may be one question he refuses to answer at all, not angrily, not emotionally, but legally. Which raises another uncomfortable possibility. What if the lawsuit threat wasn't about correcting the record, but about stopping the record from being expanded? Because here's the risk with legal action that no one likes to talk about. Once lawyers get involved, control starts to slip. Discovery exists. Documents get requested. Conversations get examined. And suddenly, a rumor that could have faded away becomes something far more dangerous, a matter of evidence. That's why many legal experts say the quiet part out loud. The people who threaten lawsuits the loudest are often the ones who least want a courtroom. And that brings us to the part of the story that almost no one is addressing. If no DNA test exists, a lawsuit is simple. If one does exist, even privately, everything changes. Because then the question isn't whether the public deserves to know. It's whether the truth can stay buried at all. So when Lady C and Tom Bower continued speaking, calmly, confidently, without retracting a word, it sent a message. They weren't bluffing, and they weren't backing down, which leads to the real cliffhanger. Because according to sources close to the situation, the most dramatic part of the story didn't happen on television. It happened afterward, behind closed doors, inside palace conversations, where silence suddenly became strategy. No dramatic music, no raised voices, no breaking news banner flashing across the screen. Just a few carefully chosen words delivered calmly on live television. And yet, those words landed like a match in a room full of gas. Because according to Lady C and Tom Bower, this wasn't speculation. It wasn't gossip framed as theory. It was spoken the way insiders speak when they assume the audience already understands the subtext. A DNA test, quietly done, and never discussed again. At first, nothing seemed to happen. No palace statement, no spokesperson rushing to clarify, no immediate denial, just silence. And in royal watching, silence is the longest pause you'll ever hear. Here's why that matters. Prince Harry has been the subject of relentless commentary for years. From the moment he and Meghan stepped back from royal duties, commentators, authors, and broadcasters have made claims far more explosive than this one. Accusations of betrayal, financial disputes, family feuds, even questions about his mental health. And through all of that, Harry largely responded the same way. Interviews, books, selective engagement, but rarely threats. So when reports began circulating that legal action was being considered over this specific claim, it raised eyebrows across media circles. Why this? Why not the others? Think about the mechanics of outrage versus fear. Outrage is loud. Fear is precise. Outrage lashes out everywhere. Fear targets one thing and one thing only. And this reaction was targeted. The alleged legal warnings didn't come after months of buildup. They came fast, almost reflexively, as if a boundary had been crossed that everyone understood, but no one had ever crossed publicly before. Ask yourself this: if you were Prince Harry and someone repeated a lie about you on television, what would you do? You'd deny it. You'd correct it. You'd move on. But if someone casually referenced a truth you had worked very hard to keep private, that's when panic sets in. That's when the response shifts from public relations to legal pressure. And here's the detail most casual viewers overlooked. Lady C and Tom Bower didn't backtrack. They didn't soften their language afterward. They didn't issue clarifications. They didn't say they were misunderstood. In fact, their tone suggested confidence, the kind of confidence that comes from believing the other side knows exactly what you're talking about. That's what rattled people watching closely, because in media, bluff recognizes bluff. And this didn't feel like bluffing. Behind the scenes, journalists reportedly began asking a different question altogether. Not is the rumor true, but why does this rumor matter so much? That's when the story stopped being about biology and started being about identity. Prince Harry has spoken openly about feeling like an outsider within the royal family, about being treated differently, about sensing, even as a child, that his role was unstable, secondary, conditional, spare, replaceable, temporary. Now imagine living with that feeling your entire life and then being confronted with a test that could confirm or destabilize everything you thought you knew about yourself, even if the results changed nothing legally, even if they altered nothing publicly. Psychologically, that's an earthquake. And earthquakes don't announce themselves with press releases. They announce themselves with silence, tension, and sudden attempts to shut doors that were never meant to open. Here's another contradiction worth sitting with. If this DNA claim were false, legal action would be risky for the accusers, not Harry. Defamation law cuts both ways. A courtroom would force Lady C and Tom Bower to produce sources, evidence, or justification. And yet, they didn't retreat. Which raises the uncomfortable possibility that the threat of court isn't scaring them, but it is scaring someone else. Because legal action doesn't just silence critics, it creates a paper trail. It invites scrutiny. It brings private matters into formal processes that don't respect tradition, hierarchy, or family loyalty. Courts don't care about titles. They care about facts. And once facts are requested, control evaporates. That's why the most revealing part of this chapter isn't what was said on television. It's what wasn't said afterward. No categorical denial, no simple dismissal. No, this is nonsense. Just pressure. And pressure is what people apply when time is not on their side. Because once a question is asked publicly, it never fully disappears. It echoes. It resurfaces. It gets repeated by people who weren't afraid to ask it the first time. Which leads to the next, far more dangerous phase of this story. Because according to those familiar with palace dynamics, the real response didn't come from Harry himself. It came from the institution. And what the palace allegedly chose to do next may explain why this single sentence on live TV triggered a reaction unlike anything we've seen before. There was no emergency press conference, rushing on air with sources close to the palace, no official denial stamped with crests and protocol. Instead, there was something far more telling: coordination. Because according to multiple observers of royal crisis management, the palace didn't react the way it does when a rumor is obviously false. It reacted the way it does when a subject is dangerous, not because it's explosive, but because it's destabilizing. And that distinction matters. Here's the uncomfortable truth about how the royal family handles scandal. When something is untrue, it's killed quickly. A line is briefed. A denial is issued. Allies in the press are activated. The story fades within days. But when something is complicated, when it touches identity, lineage, or legitimacy, the strategy changes entirely. Silence first. Containment second. Pressure third. And that pattern is exactly what people say unfolded here. According to claims repeated by Lady C and Tom Bower, the DNA test rumor was never meant to be public. It was something discussed privately among a very small circle, with the understanding that it would never cross into the public domain. Not because it would change succession, not because it would rewrite history, but because it would reopen wounds the palace spent decades sealing shut. Think about the timing. Princess Diana's legacy remains one of the most emotionally charged subjects in royal history. Every comparison, every resemblance, every comment about Harry not fitting in has always been treated with extreme caution. Now add one more element to that equation: a private test. Results known only to a handful of people, and a decision, allegedly, to never let those results see daylight. Whether the results confirmed anything or not almost becomes secondary. What matters is the choice to bury them. Because once something is buried, it becomes radioactive. And here's where the contradiction sharpens. Prince Harry has repeatedly accused the palace of controlling narratives, of hiding uncomfortable truths, of choosing optics over honesty. He has framed himself as the one willing to expose what others won't. So why, if faced with a rumor that could be decisively disproven, would the palace and Harry choose silence instead of clarity? Why leave a vacuum where speculation thrives? One answer keeps coming up among insiders: because clarity would require disclosure. And disclosure would raise new questions that no one wants answered. Imagine for a moment that the test happened and the results confirmed what Harry always believed. That changes nothing legally, nothing constitutionally, nothing in terms of titles. But imagine the opposite. Imagine results that complicated identity, that forced private conversations about belonging, legacy, and the emotional fallout of truths revealed too late. That kind of information doesn't stay contained. It changes how people speak, how they interact, how they protect one another, and most importantly, how they panic when someone mentions it out loud. That's why this alleged palace response wasn't about denial. It was about discouragement. Not "this is false," but "this should not be discussed." Because once discussion begins, the institution loses its greatest weapon: control of the narrative. And here's the irony no one can escape. By trying to suppress the question, the palace may have amplified it. Media outlets that never would have touched the rumor before suddenly began circling it. Commentators started asking why this topic was treated differently from dozens of others. Viewers noticed the absence of denial, and silence, once again, spoke louder than words. This is the danger zone for any powerful institution, because the moment you treat a rumor as untouchable, you signal that it matters. And once people sense that something matters, they don't stop asking. Which brings us to the next turning point. Because while the palace was allegedly focused on containment, another risk was growing quietly in the background: legal action. And legal action doesn't operate on tradition or discretion, it operates on procedure, on records, on evidence. And if this ever moved beyond threats and into a courtroom, the very thing everyone was trying to avoid could become unavoidable. Not speculation, but discovery. And that's where the story stops being about what may or may not be true and starts being about what could be forced into the open. Because once that door cracks, it doesn't close gently. It slams. Not when a rumor first appears, not when commentators whisper, and not even when legal threats are floated. The reckoning comes when silence stops working. That's where the story now lives. Because whether a DNA test ever happened or not, the reaction to the claim has already reshaped the narrative in a way no lawsuit can undo. What began as a fleeting on-air remark has evolved into something far more damaging. A question the palace refuses to answer, and a prince who appears unwilling to let it be asked again. And that contradiction sits at the center of everything. Prince Harry has spent years telling the world that secrets are poison, that unspoken truths rot families from the inside, that the royal family's greatest weakness is its obsession with burying uncomfortable realities instead of confronting them. Those themes are the backbone of his public identity, which is why this moment feels so jarring. Because when confronted with a claim that could be cleared up decisively, the response wasn't transparency. It wasn't openness. It wasn't even a carefully worded denial. It was pressure, and pressure tells a story all its own. Think about how this looks from the outside. A man who says he was silenced now appears to be silencing others. A family accused of hiding truth is suddenly accused of doing it again. And the louder the effort to shut the conversation down becomes, the more people lean in. That's not how rumors die, that's how they mutate. Here's the part that makes this especially dangerous. Even if the DNA rumor is completely false, the way it's being handled ensures it will never fully disappear. Because denial wasn't chosen, silence was. And silence invites imagination. People don't ask questions when answers are clear. They ask when something feels unfinished. And this feels unfinished. What's more, the threat of legal action may have created the exact scenario everyone was trying to avoid. Because now, the story isn't just about a rumor. It's about why that rumor triggered such an extreme response. Was it fear of reputational damage? Fear of emotional fallout?